All right, I'm going to try to make this quick. I really think this might be my favorite chapter because to me, the idea of perception it's really central to so much of what we do. And I want you to think about what you learned in chapter 7 about nonverbal communication and tell me what you see as the overlaps or the connections between nonverbal communication and the idea of perception. So, this is something that I don't know why they took out of the 16th edition because to me, this was so central, such a central idea in the 15th. So, the idea that sounds very much like the Matrix, that reality is constructed. So, what do we mean by that? So, we have something called first order realities, physically observable qualities of a thing or a situation. So, you go to the grocery store and you see a bunch of bananas, and you would say, here's a first order reality. There are 6 bananas in this bunch. There's a sticker that says Chiquita on 4 of the bananas. The bananas are yellowish green. Okay. The second order realities is attaching meaning to first order things or situations. Bananas are disgusting. Bananas are delicious. Second order realities don't reside in the objects or the events, but in our minds. And we so often confuse. We see the first order reality, but we immediately go to the second order reality. And then when somebody says, "What are you nuts? That's that's not my experience," we think that something's wrong with them rather than the fact that we just have a different way of attaching meaning to the situation that we're in. So this is an absolutely crucial aspect of perception, and I wish they hadn't taken it out of the textbook. Okay, now we're in the first section, which has to do with the steps in the perception process. This makes sense, right? You have to select what exactly are you going to pay attention to, and then you have to organize it. You have to arrange it in a way that is meaningful, and then you have to say, well, what does it mean? So that makes sense, and I think we frequently might forget about the idea of I can't say this word, negotiation, which is how we influence other people's perception. Okay, so you get that bunch of bananas and you say, "Oh, the bananas, I have no idea. I haven't bought bananas in a long time. It's I don't know. It's 80 cents a pound." Okay? All right, first order reality, and somebody says, "Wow, that's really expensive. We should buy what's cheaper? We should buy carrots instead." I don't know, because they're cheaper. And you say, "Yes, but I don't I want to make banana bread. I don't want to make a carrot cake." And okay. So you kind of go back and forth and you ultimately come to the decision in this perception process that it's worthwhile to buy the bananas. Okay. So hopefully that makes sense. There's a lot of information. Just go through that section in the textbook. I'm going to guess that you will say you might want to talk about punctuation when we get into class. It has nothing to do with commas, periods, semicolons. It's part of organization, but I will leave that in case you have questions about it. So, what are some of the things that influence our perception? Okay. So, basically, when we don't have a lot of information about a topic, we perceive it one way, and the more information that we get, the more we can change our perception. And what is the information that we're looking at? It's on things that we've observed. It's on the different roles that we play. You as the textbook talks about, you have a sweetheart, and you perceive them one way, and then you meet their family for the first time and you see this sweetheart not as just your beloved, but as a member of the family, as the darling child or the annoying older brother or sister. And you're because you've gotten more information, your perception changes. The textbook also talks about, especially these days, based on social media, we learn more information, and they have this interesting, this is something new in this edition, the idea of context collapse, which is the idea that frequently people that you didn't necessarily intend to have information about you get information about you. Hopefully that made sense to you. Okay. Something else has to do with physiological influences, such as through our senses, based on age, based on our health, and if we're tired or not tired, or if we're a morning person or evening person, if we're hungry, if we happen to have ADHD or bipolar or on the spectrum. All of these are physiological influences. Physiological means of the body, of the physical body. Okay, so those things. You ever know when you if you have a headache, the world is a cruel place, or if you are late for work, suddenly you notice that everybody's a bad driver. Okay. We will spend some time, I mean, we'll talk about anything you want to, but I think we will spend time in class talking about social influences, because there's a fascinating idea that social scientists have created, and they call it standpoint theory. And the idea is that a person's position in society shapes their perspective. If you've grown up always with, wealth and privilege, it is very hard for you see the world differently than someone who grew up without that. Okay. Obviously, when we're looking at social influence, sex and gender have an influence. So generally what we say is sex has to do with the biology, and gender has to do with how society views, well, what does it mean to be masculine? What does it mean to be feminine? And obviously, what does it mean to be gender fluid? Or what does it mean to be? So we could spend probably an entire semester talking about these kinds of things. Another one is occupational roles. So in a sense, the job that you do influences how you perceive the world. And then another one is relational roles. So any of you who maybe are a parent, once you became a parent, you saw the world differently because you were no longer carefree. You now had you were no longer as carefree as you used to be. You now had the responsibility for somebody else, so you started to look at the world differently. Okay. And of course, there are cultural influences. I don't know that I want to talk about all of these right now, except obviously the idea that the culture in which we were raised influences how we perceive the world. And the textbook talks about, do you come from a culture that values silence? Do you come from a culture that values talk? It looks at the idea that different cultures have an idea of what it means to be healthy and to be well. The ability to understand different perspectives. This was fascinating to me. If you were raised in an individualistic culture, i.e. the United States, I'm making a generalization here, okay? You might find it difficult to understand the world from someone else's perspective, because they had a fascinating study, I thought. I mean, it's from 2007, so it's almost 20 minus 7 minus 3, 17 years. They put people from China and US, they paired them together in a game, and the participants had to take on the perspective of their partner, and they found that the people from the United States had difficulty, but the people from China, who were from a collectivistic culture, had an easier time of it. So this is part of what it means to be from a collectivistic culture. If you're always thinking of, I am part of a collective, part of a group, my behavior has an impact on other people. How do other people see me? So, okay. Stereotyping. We should talk a little bit more about stereotyping. I think we should also talk about cultural appropriation again. And this was fascinating. Another study, only 10 years old now. They showed people pictures of children of different races, and the participants perceived Black children as being older than they actually were. So let's say they showed pictures of 10-year-olds, white, Black, Hispanic. I don't know, they didn't mention Asian. And they said, how old do you think they are? And people were stereotyping. Anyways, we can talk about this in class. Okay, the common tendencies in perception is basically the topic of our discussion. Okay, and so this is a section that I want you to make sure that you look at probably a couple of times to make sure that you understand it. So what is happening in these common tendencies in perception is we are attributing, let me try to say it. We're hold on, I gotta pause and gather my thoughts. All right, I don't know if I gathered my thoughts, but there is a concept called attribution. You maybe have heard the verb attribute. Like, what do you attribute this to? So you're like, well, why is this happening? We are assigning meaning to something. So anyways, there are a few common tendencies in perception. I'm going to kind of gallop through these because we will talk about them in class. We tend to make snap judgments. Okay? If you are interested in this concept, Harvard created something called the implicit association test to show it helps you to see what your biases are. This test is not without detractors, but it can be very interesting to do the test. And I'd encourage you to do it. I actually have a link. Okay. Come on. All right. Somehow I paused. Oh, I have no idea where I paused it. Okay. So one of the common tendencies is snap judgments. Another one is that we cling to first impressions. There's four really interesting ideas here. The primacy effect, we remember things that we see first. And if we liked that person or we liked that situation, then we tend to think good things. That's called the halo effect. If we had a negative first impression, it's harder to get rid of that. That's called the horns effect. And one I love is something called confirmation bias. We look for information that supports our impression. Ooh, let's talk about that in class. Okay. Another one is we judge ourselves more charitably than we judge other people. If you are like me, you are very hard on yourself. However, in general, what people do is judge themselves more charitably. So what happens is you're driving, and maybe you're kind of late for work and you cut someone off and you say, well, I am not a bad driver or a bad person. It was the situation that I was in. That is called the self-serving bias. On the other hand, if someone does that to you, we do what's called the fundamental attribution error, which we say this person is they are a bad person. So we say it is a characteristic of that person, but if it happens to us, it's just that it was the situation. Okay. 3 more. We are influenced by our expectations. If I think that a movie is going to be bad, probably going to look for things that are bad. We're also influenced by the obvious. You walk into a room and you see one child is crying and the other child is kind of looking smug, you figure the second child hit the first child. Maybe not. And we assume others are like us. If you've ever told a joke that you thought was very funny and other people found it offensive, you just figured they had the same sense of humor that you did. Okay. The last section is called Synchronizing our Perception. We are going to do an exercise on perception checking. I firmly believe that this is one of the most important skills you can learn in this class. And we will go over this in great detail. We'll do some exercises. It's not necessarily easy, but it can be very useful. Okay. I'm going back and forth on, do I want to talk about the idea of empathy now, or let's say we'll also talk about this in class. We want to make sure that we are talking about the difference between empathy and sympathy. And the textbook, I disagree somewhat with the textbook. Okay. I agree. Like, what do they know? They're only communication scholars. But I agree that part of empathy has to do with perspective taking. Another part has to do with being concerned. There's some discussion about this idea of emotional contagion. If you empathize with someone, do you have to take on their emotions also? I am going to share with you some of the work of Dr. Brené Brown and what she has to say about empathy, because I firmly believe she is on target and these guys are somewhat off. Okay, and then we will also talk about the idea of the golden rule. You remember that? Do unto others, like treat people the way you want to be treated. I also have a little bit of a problem with this one too. So anyways, this was a little bit longer than I wanted, but I hope it gives you a good overview, and I hope you like that idea about first order and second order realities. All right, done.